Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And I'll be very honest, this was a hard week to pull things together. Hard to absorb new music, hard to stay ahead of my schedule. But I'll be honest, new music is probably the one thing that's kept me normal and sane right about now. So hold on if you can. We're back on the Pulse. So we've got 8 albums on the docket this week, but let's start by going back to From True Body, Heavenly Rhythms for the Uninitiated. Okay, so this is a project that dropped back in April, and I've been looking to talk about for a little bit. Mostly because sometimes you need a bit of throwback post-punk and darkwave in your life, like Drab Majesty, and True Body is kind of filling the bill for me. Now granted, when it comes to this sort of sound, I'm going to be looking to hear what differentiates this band from what could have come out 40 years ago, and for True Body, well, what I think separates them is their tones are less obviously electronic, bringing in a thicker cushion of beach house-esque dream pop and embracing more of the echoing, hammering post-punk edges of the sharper drum work, the peeling guitars, and even some Nick Cave influence and Isabel Moreno Riano's vocals to go along with some of the obvious Joy Division parallels. Now, there's some of that peeling, smoky gloss through the mix, but the underlying grooves are way more kinetic, and they build to some real hooks in the way that a lot of gothic darkwave and dream pop can occasionally miss. And there's more than a few moments that go for that pulsating 80s bigness in their hooks, and that leads to the writing and the rather inspired synergy that the band found, interweaving a lot of traditionally 80s smoldering goth rock and synth pop iconography with a lot of distinctly trans subtext and themes, which takes the dreams of escapism, the questions of faith, the fractured romances, the desperate running wild in the city amidst uncaring power structures seeking to exploit or marginalize them, and gives it some real modern teeth. But it's not just playing for shock in the juxtaposition. No, what's more powerful is how romantic this album feels. It swings big, and it doesn't shy away from a rather tragic moment epitomized in the final couple songs. I will say there are a couple things that could have been fine-tuned. I wish the vocals were layered to be a bit more strident. I wish the rattling post-punk side could cut amid some of the dreamy side with a little bit more punch to match the drums, and yeah, it can drag in spots, and I do think the band is a step away from what could be their best, especially if they push a little further from their influences, but as it is, yeah, this is a great little surprise, and a nice quiet little thing that I found. Light 8 out of 10, absolutely worth hearing. Next up, from Off-Road Minivan, Swan Dive. So this has been on my schedule for a few weeks, mostly because the lyrics weren't published anywhere until pretty recently, but also because if patrons request the emo side projects of underwhelming metalcore bands like Fit for a King, there's just not going to be much that'll grab my interest. Now, I heard some listeners find this different because the frontman is going for an early 2000s post-grunge huskiness with a real bad head cold that doesn't really match the visceral presence of other acts, or indeed convey much emotional personality at all, but that's because the entire album screams of an established and polished, more radio act making a pivot toward this now popular subgenre in rock and losing a fair amount of intensity along the way. Hell, even a lot of the emo that got popular in the early 2000s had more punch than this. Now, that's not saying that there aren't advantages coming from this angle. If you're not punks just coming up, you probably know how to structure a cohesive song or a strong hook, or at least have better odds in terms of production. And even if there are moments where the band goes kinda back to some metalcore roots and it doesn't match with anything, there's gotta be a little more polish or punch here, right? Well, that's the thing when you wind up on tooth and nail. Between some messy cymbal mixing, some questionable elevation of the pitchier elements of our frontman's vocals, and some of the acoustics can sound really oddly canned, and then the guitars that increasingly slide towards grungy, down-tuned riffing, just winds up feeling both sour and really running together in terms of its overall tune. And if the production doesn't get there for you, the content certainly will. I've said before in talking about emo that if you're gonna hit rock bottom, maybe find some sort of lyrical flair or a glimmer of hope or some larger societal commentary. Whereas this act not only doubles down on the suicide songs, most of them are framed as sullen responses to breakups or lost love with enough self-awareness that it's a guilt trip, but not enough to actually stop it. And that's where all the pseudo-religious faux martyr angle slides in and just becomes really unpleasant. In other words, yeah, it's boring as tar, and when it's not, it's miserable. And not in the good way. 4 out of 10, no recommendation. Next up from Vistas, Everything Changes in the End. Well, this is something I haven't seen in a while. A Scottish 3-piece indie rock band with some Black Keys-esque scuzzy guitars, some chunky bass lines, and a commitment to the sort of early Strokes bouncy rawness that could be sanded back just enough for a car commercial. And if that sounds cynical, well, it is. But the odd thing is that I haven't had a group like this come up on my radar for a while that it almost kind of feels a bit novel. You'd expect more of these acts between 2013 and maybe 2016. They even used Tiger Blood as a reference to Courage, and I was suddenly reminded that Charlie Sheen existed. And for another, I don't tend to dislike these bands as much if the melodic groove, strong hook, and the content punch above their weight class. And you know what? Credit to Vistas on their debut here. It's not bad. It's energetic, it's got more texture and bounce than it needs, the hooks are pretty solid, the bass lines are by far the best part of the album, and while the mix can absolutely sound blown out by some of the fuzz and patches, a lot can be forgiven on a very energetic debut. To a point. Because between the occasional millennial whoop, the big shout-along chorus, a not particularly distinctive frontman that reminds me a little too much of Alex Ebert, and lyrics that can feel really basic, chipper, and inoffensive in their upbeat poetry. Look, for me they fall in similar territory as American Authors, another band that I've probably been too kind to for coasting on easy marketability and strong hooks, but again, they're not really doing much wrong here either. It's one-dimensional, but it's a niche they handle well. Unfortunately, it doesn't really add up to a more memorable project, and when an album is this bouncy, you would hope it would. So, strong 6 out of 10. Give it a listen if you want that quick boost of upbeat adrenaline. Don't be surprised if it doesn't last. Next up from Nicole Atkins, Italian Ice. So I'll be brutally honest, I went back to revisit my old review of Nicole Atkins, and I have no idea what I was thinking when I wrote it. Mostly in terms of the comparisons I tried to draw to her scattered musical influences. I mean, the progressive rock elements mashed into sultry baroque pop and indie country, coupled with a very noir presentation. I mean, she's not quite as stately and composed as an Angel Olsen, not quite nailing the smoky danger of an Amy Winehouse, but I can see some parallels to both that I really should have highlighted more. Now, granted, going more towards alternative country on her last album did make things a bit easier to describe, even if I don't think it quite caught the same vigor, which unfortunately might be the case with this album too. I mean, the easiest parallel I've been able to draw this year is with the last US Girls album, albeit probably leaning a little bit more heavily on the smoky country and the faint touches of some 70s prog. But the vintage Baroque pop that's swaddled in reverb, the hooks that aren't hitting as strongly as they used to, mostly because of the choice to wash out a lot of the vocals, the lyrics that feel more undercooked but maybe could have landed if the themes didn't feel a little bit more diffuse along the way. Considering how distinctive she's been on previous albums, it's so frustrating that this feels so backwards looking and not even rising to the best of those old AM rock standards she's trying to imitate. And it's not like I dislike her approach to the romanticism of this content, or that it doesn't sound opulent and textured. It really does. And she still has a fantastic voice in order to sell it, but I don't know, outside of AM Gold and Never Going Home Again, the latter which is a glorified tour song that doesn't make the most of its guests, the writing can start to seem really underweight and painting these pictures, often caught in the give and take of relationships where she's either exasperated they're still here or pining for them to come back in some form. I don't know, honestly, for the most part it feels like an old soul record minus a lot of that firepower, and unless the song's aimed a bit higher, well, I don't know, she might be able to say that she can ride and trace this down forever, follow those dreams, but forever might be a mighty long time, and that might be to her detriment. 6 out of 10. I was hoping this was gonna be better. Next up from Lil Yachty, Lil Boat 3.
I'm around till the beat is over. Tushing up back, same price my mink sofa. And I move like the King Cobra. Slamming in my dog, I didn't have to think it over. This little bitch, I'ma bend her over. After I'm done, call the gang, I'ma send her over.
Let's keep this quick. I think it's pretty obvious that Lil Yachty's time in the mainstream has faded fast. He was somewhat right in that his brand has eclipsed some of his actual impact, but outside of writing that he's done behind the scenes, his star has been eclipsed by artists that somehow show off even less variety and quality. And even then, with every project that he has targeting the mainstream, Yachty's sound has gotten less homegrown and melodic, and more of his oddball personality has fallen away to reveal a painfully limited, auto-tuned croon rapper with weak flows and haphazard wordplay. Now, this is his first solo project since dropping both Nothing to Prove and Lil Boat 2 in 2018, and Lil Boat 3 proves in spades over 19 songs, nearly an hour, that there wasn't anything worth missing here. The kooky melodies are often faded against increasingly sterile, cheap, and basic trap percussion, which somehow Yachty is still struggling to ride effectively in his increasingly flat and disaffected auto-tune flow. And midway through the album, a lot of the actual tune just evaporates or somehow gets even uglier. And outside of basic repetition, there's little in the way of distinctive melodic hooks, or even much coherence in structuring a vocal crescendo to build to a hook. It's very clear that most of this album is cobbled together from undercooked, underproduced fragments with little beyond utterly boring gunplay, brand names, and sex references that's only split up by the occasional punchline that isn't so much weird in an interesting way, but kinda corny in the same way that Big Sean used to be. But even in terms of pure bangers, he gets handily outshone by most of the guests that show up, most obviously on TD, courtesy of Tierra Whack and Tyler the Creator, but even by Future, a song later. And that's not counting moments when Drake, DaBaby, and Young Thug show up. I mean, I'll give Lil Yachty credit that it's not as embarrassingly incompetent as he's been before, but that might honestly be worse, because there's pretty much nothing here that stuck with me as unique or innovative that I really cared about beyond mild disgust. And when I did care, it wasn't because of him. So yeah, this ain't good. Strong 3 out of 10, skip it. Next up, from Freddie Gibbs and Alchemist, Alfredo.
Hit a bitch with that extended clip with that revolver shit, it's so the same purpose. Geekers beaming up the Scotty in my crack lobby, I can smell the cane burning. Michael Jordan, 1985, bitch, I traveled with a cocaine circus.
You know, I didn't formally cover the last time Freddie Gibbs worked with Alchemist in his collab with Currency called Fetty. That because I'm not really much of a Currency fan, but also because it didn't give me a lot to say. A lot of gangsta hustling over smooth production, but not quite as punchy or potent as it could be. And I'll admit I had some similar expectations with Alfredo, even coming off of Bandana showing Gibbs continuing to evolve as a rapper, although I still stand by Pinata being his best work to date. But you know what, I'll be honest, I'll probably put Alfredo in a similar tier as Bandana for me. It aims a little lower and feels a lot more streamlined, and the content is nothing unfamiliar if you're used to Freddie Gibbs flexing, but that can work to great effect when you got production this buttery and smooth and sample-rich, opposite a lot of Freddie Gibbs' relaxed but still intensely charismatic delivery with really damn solid flows. Hell, Freddie Gibbs' technical prowess, it's the one big reason I'm a lot more accommodating of his luxury rap moments than a lot of others. He makes it sound so damn chill but well structured, it's hard to dismiss or dislike. Now, I wouldn't quite say it's Gibbs' best when it comes to storytelling per se, and you do have to go digging for the more introspective moments like the toil that a gangsta life will take, the two biggest factor as to why Pinata remains his best. And on a purely aesthetic level in some of his poetry, some of the smoothness can feel a bit compromised when he's rhyming words or phrases with themselves. It's nitpicking, but it got a bit distracting. That being said, Alchemist put on a clinic with the production blending and the grooves that are so robust, and the guest performances from everyone else did add some differentiation and dimension to the content, especially with Tyler the Creator delivering a lighter focus, and he's just on a roll with guest performances in recent memory, and Conway the Machine focusing more on his struggles as a family man. And when Gibbs does get a little more serious, his alarmingly timely verse on Scotty Beam, the utterly vicious darkness of Frank Lucas along with Benny the Butcher, his come-up reminiscence on Something to Rap About, and especially the more sober reminiscence behind the guitar sample on Skinny Shug, he delivers exactly what I want to hear out of this side of gangster rap, and it's really well balanced. So yeah, very strong 8 out of 10. It is what you would expect, but really, when my expectations can be this high, that speaks volumes. definitely worth hearing. Check it out. Next up from Kygo, Golden Hour.
Bring me a higher love. Oh.
I mentioned this before, but by far the best way for me to cover electronic music like this, especially given how they can feel like glorified singles collections as it is, it's in a format like this, especially given my warnings that even despite my fondness for Kygo's hyper-earnest, breezy house bounce, he's been heading toward an artistic ceiling if he didn't expand his sound or content, which is exactly what happened on Golden Hour. He hit that ceiling. And while I can't begrudge him for the fact that this might be the worst possible time to release a bouncy, optimistic vocal house project, even with that, this is an album that feels like he hit a brick wall when it came to growth in his content and sound, with fewer standouts that, once again, very heavily depend on the guest presence, which doesn't help a project that runs long at a solid hour. Seriously, there are 18 songs here, and the most striking performances come from the late Whitney Houston on the remix of Higher Love, and from Zach Brown, of all people, on Someday, because he can still put together a killer vocal arrangement. Outside of that, there is very little in the way of standout content, and even less in the production, where Kygo will default to some combination of piano, acoustic guitar, or washed out electric guitar that can build into an increasingly flimsy groove with a few Avicii synth progressions and nowhere close to the textured tropical house percussion for which he's been known. And what's bizarre is how he's occasionally trying to throw in an odd synth modulation or a weirdly slower groove, and really none of it comes together, especially at the expense of the big bouncy progressions for which he's known and well liked. Now granted, he's not helped by a few singers like House or Jamie X Commons who can't stay on a group to save their lives, but it's a mess all around. And as for the content, come on, it's EDM. It's very flimsy love songs with a smattering of turbulence and a few breakups. The most interesting moments probably coming on Oh Wonder's tense interplay on How Would I Know, Kim Petras of all people in her bitter melodrama on Broken Glass, and on Like It Is, a kiss off from Zara Larsson to Tyga of all people, and him not sticking the landing is the point of the song. Now beyond that, look, I'll admit, outside of some kind of skeevy and quasi-manipulative cuts like Beautiful and Hurting, it's fine. I'm a complete sucker for this sort of vibe, you all know that. But it is Kygo's worst. It's only saved from a lower score by Higher Love, and that song's got mixed reception, so extremely light 6 out of 10. Take all that what it's worth. And finally, from Lady Gaga, Chromatica.
Rain on me, rain, rain, rain on me, rain, rain.
Here's a hard question. What are people looking for from a Lady Gaga album these days? Because she's had chart longevity without precisely having pop longevity, especially in recent years. And if we're being very honest, she hasn't released a great album since The Fame Monster. And this is coming from somebody who will defend more from Born This Way and even art pop than I probably should. When I reviewed Joanne 4 years ago, I made a comparison to Eric Church, but in reality, for as much as she's tried to make her meta text about celebrity and being a pop star stand for more in pop than it actually has, she honestly reminds me more of the 1975, up to and including going massively over the top. The clumsy political pivots are at their best. She's just making straightforward balls-to-wall music in her lane, hitting greatness with genre flourishes that make sense with a bit of refinement. So I'll admit I was kind of encouraged by her going back to her roots and making a straightforward electro-pop album with way too many obvious nods at Madonna. I mean, it's not her fault she got overshadowed in the worst possible timing courtesy of everything else, but how's the music? Honestly, for what it is, it's good. It's probably her most cohesive project as a whole, and a return to lighter, piano-backed house with some sharper grooves and a lot of Ray of Light-esque electro-pop callbacks. It's a natural fit for Lady Gaga, and she's got the huge voice and real charisma to back it up, especially when she can play off of Ariana Grande or even Elton John. The problem comes in looking for anything transgressive or challenging or boundary-pushing in pop that's normally her de rigueur for Lady Gaga, and even if 10 years ago was more marketing than the truth, which it was, at least the lyrics could feel a little bit more transgressive and off the wall than this album does, mostly because Lady Gaga's pop writing has collapsed in scope to feel more intimate and honest, aiming to be more empowering and healing, which is fine, but when she goes for the more outright pop songs, I mean, come on, it's not like Plastic Dolls, Candy Metaphors, or Alice in Wonderland are untapped territory and making odd commentary on pop music. and it doesn't feel as potent as it could. But really, I'd argue the bigger problem is in the production. Most of the album is handled by Blood Pop, ironically, because a lot of these beats feel shrink-wrapped, sterile, and bloodless, with a little bit too much vocal compression for its own good, and some questionable sample blending. And while there are moments that have got punch and some legit great songs like 911 or Fun Tonight, the middle of this project drags, starting with the mediocre Blackpink collaboration Sour Candy, and the lack of greater flair and variety in the production means it sadly starts to run together. Now again, it's not bad by any means. It's probably Gaga's most consistently catchy and well-formed project since Born This Way, but I'm left thinking that if she was looking to make her grand pop return, I wish she had done a little bit more than go back to her most obvious influences, because I gotta say it, continuously going back to the past doesn't always make the future. So with that, 7 out of 10, still good, not quite great, and I still think Gaga can do that. But hey, thanks a lot for watching. You'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I know, tough times, so I completely understand if none of you guys want to get on board with my Patreon at this time, but if you do, links in the description below. Beyond that, I'm sure I said something controversial, so have fun in the comments. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And hey, all y'all, stay safe out there. We're in tough times. Until then, I'm Mark. You're watching On the Pulse on Spectrum Pulse. And I'll see you next time.